discussion on corruption. Today is 9th of December 2017. Now, 9th of December since 2003 has been set aside as the International Anti-Corruption Day. And one of the most striking statistics by Transparency International worldwide survey that was conducted recently shows that people are more prone to wanting to fight corruption. That's actually something positive. I have a great panel with me this morning to sort of talk about this International World Corruption Day and where, as Kenya, we've come and where we're going to. Now, no society is immune to corruption, definitely. Kenya also is no different from that. Sitting close to me is Paul Annan, who is a program advisor, anti-corruption and development, in devolution rather, with Kenya Human Rights Commission. Thank you so much for making time this morning. Next to Paul is Samantha Minor, who is a social justice advocate. Good morning, Samantha. And next to Samantha is Patrick Gadara, who is a writer, a cartoonist, as well as the founder for the Elephant at the elephant.info. Patrick, thank you so much for making time as well. All right, so before we can jump into this conversation, allow me to share with you a few statistics and sort of throw back where we started as a nation. Back in 2015, when President Uhuru Kenyatta made his State of the Nation address around March of that year, showing confidence that his government will fight corruption. He had a list of 116 top public officials that were suspected for corruption, and he gave the EACC, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption, 60 days to do their research, to investigate and also charge. And part of that list, or part of those names, was Charity Ngelu, who was then the Cabinet Secretary for Lands, Engineer Michael Kamau with Transport, Felix Koskei, Agriculture, Kambi Kazungu, Labor, and Davis Chichir with Energy were all facing graft charges, and they were sent home. Now, a number of scandals have also come up within the Jubilee administration. A number of them is the Youth Fund, which saw a loss of 180 million Kenyan shillings. The NYS scam, 790 million, which saw the whistleblower who resigned, that was Cabinet Secretary Ainwar Guru then. The Afya House scandal, which was happening just around the same time as the NYS, 5 billion Kenyan shillings was at the center of it all. And the Eurobond, 2 billion Kenyan shillings, the Eurobond is something that saw Henry Rotich at the center of it all. So that's just a list of some of the corruption scandal. And the people who have been charged with this, take a look at this: 2,803 middle-level officers. These are the procurement officers as well as the clerks. Low-ranking officers account for 2,099. We're talking about sub-chiefs, askaris, and the clergy officials. 758 is the number with high-ranking officials, putting it 758. These are the public secretaries, accounting officers, as well as CEOs. We will be taking a look at the white-collar corruption and the role that the private sector rather has to play. Cases that were reported and analyzed by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption, 2011 to 2012, we saw different statistics and numbers with that. And from 2012, 2013, different numbers as well as, and compared to 2014, 2015. All right. So the Jubilee journey of corruption has been something that was very optimistic at the beginning. We saw President Uhuru Kenyatta giving EACC 60 days back in 2015 when a list came out. It was quite optimistic to see him doing this and sending 5 cabinet secretaries home. But then over the years, we've seen that optimism change into corruption. Paul, where would you rank Jubilee's performance when it comes to fighting corruption?
Well, as you put it rightly, perhaps when Jubilee government came to power, they showed a lot of passion and urge to fight corruption. Mm-hmm. And perhaps that is evidenced by the list that was submitted to Uhuru Kenyatta, which he went forth, read in Parliament, received applause from both sides in the House, and I think that was recommendable. Mm-hmm. But that was just it. That is where the war on corruption from Uhuru's perspective ended, because nothing happened after that. But again, the whole idea of submitting the list to the president is questionable, because he doesn't prosecute. So technically, what was the essence of submitting the list to Uhuru Kenyatta, and not perhaps the DPP to proceed with the prosecution? Perhaps then we would have seen some fruits, but we never saw fruits, because that is where the war on corruption from a Jubilee perspective ended. And I think Jubilee has taken credit of that for ensuring that those cabinet secretaries take political responsibility and step aside, which is recommendable. And we recommend the president for that. But that is where the war on corruption ended. Yeah. Perhaps the citizens of this country and the public would have been more interested to see what happens after that. There was money that was lost. It has never been recovered. There were accusations that were leveled against these individuals. Nothing has happened to them.
And no one has been jailed to date?
Sorry?
No one has been jailed to date?
Nobody has been jailed to date. And I think that is the question that the public is asking. Is it just a PR mechanism to showcase these people to the public and let them go scot-free? Or are we supposed to see prosecution? Are we supposed to see people going to prison? Are we supposed to see money being recovered so that at least the public can have trust in this government that is actually committed to fighting corruption? Otherwise, if we leave it at that, then we can say clearly that the Jubilee government has not done a lot in fighting corruption. Wow. Yes, but again, one other thing that perhaps I just want to mention, that we need to get the own corruption right. Is it the responsibility of Uhuru Kenyatta to prosecute individuals in criminated corruption cases? Or are there independent agencies in this country that are supposed to fight corruption? Now, we are saying that the president is supposed to take lead and provide political leadership, which is okay. But again, let these independent institutions do their work. Can we now see the president having the same urge to the independent commissions?
And very many people argue that back in 2015, when that list of shame came out, yes, and him giving the EACC 60 days, yes, people say he shouldn't have given a mandate or rather a timeline to, yes, EACC. Yeah. Would you say then he would be stepping off? Yeah. Yeah?
Yeah, because these are independent commissions. Their mandate is very clear how they're supposed to do their work. Now, when the president speaks to the nation and gives them 60 days, I do not understand why he's getting those powers, which perhaps is questionable. But politically, it was a good thing, and we appreciate that he can come and speak to the nation so. But where he gets the mandate to give the EACC an independent commission, a maximum of 6 days, and then after those 6 days, we'd see nothing. Okay. Then that is questionable. That is technically questionable. We would have wished to see more after that. And the reason why we are saying this is because these people who are implicated and were forced to resign, right now they're occupying serious positions in this country. They're in political positions of responsibility, and we are worried what they can do with those positions. Some of those positions are more senior, perhaps, because they are in charge of more money than the amount of money they were in charge of when they stepped down. Now, if these guys went free, and they are now in charge of more money than the ones they were, you can imagine what they can do with those positions. True. That's why we think that a lot need to be done in this country to fight corruption. If they take political responsibility to step aside, can they now be prosecuted? Can that money be recovered? And perhaps we need more. We need perhaps just to strengthen the laws that we have so that some people of that nature perhaps should be barred from holding political offices.
Samantha, where would you put the Jubilee government's fight on corruption?
It's sad. They've not done much. Again, I'll just pick up from what he said, a few things that he said. I mean, no one has been prosecuted. At the end of the day, it's a pardon. When you're told to go home, that's a pardon, right? There's no one who's been jailed. And of course, that's not Uhuru's job, yes, but there are institutions that are mandated and are constituted, right, so that they can ensure that people are prosecuted and jailed. So it's very, very low. Unfortunately, it does taint his legacy. It does. And then it will be interesting to see what he does the next 5 years since he is the president, but it's very low and we can't pardon these people.
So you'd give him a poor grade?
Yeah, it's a poor grade.
Okay.
Yeah.
Patrick, what about you?
Well, I don't think you'll have much argument about the fact that they've done very little to fight corruption. But I'd approach it in a different way. Yes, it's important to prosecute people. It's important to recover money that's been stolen. But I think the focus that we have on simply whether or not people have been taken to jail and prosecuted is fundamentally misplaced. What we really should be talking about is a structure that allow corruption to thrive, that incentivize corruption. And I think this is where particularly the president has failed. He has articulated no vision since he got into power in 2013 about how the system should be restructured to eliminate the opportunities for prosecution. If anything, he has gone on with his emphasis on the sort of big infrastructural projects, most of it are mired in that same corruption, to create more opportunities for corruption. We have seen him pay money to Anglo Leasing, 1.4 billion
Exactly.
that he did. And everybody talks about what happened in 2015, but he was elected and took office in 2013. He had a whole 2 years that he did nothing, And so I think, again, while it's important to insist on people being prosecuted, we've got to understand why these prosecutions don't happen.
Right.
And this is a function of the system that we have. It simply does not incentivize our policemen to go after ministers. It does not incentivize the EACC to go after people in cabinet, because every time they have tried to do it, to go after politicians, we've seen the war turned around against the EACC itself. And that's why we have this sort of halfway house where we keep getting in chairmen of the EACC and throwing them out. So unless we actually restructure the way our approach to the system, unless we actually restructure our entire system of government and start looking at the drivers of corruption and why they're there and eliminating the opportunities that are there, talk of prosecutions and stuff, it's not going to get us anywhere.
So if we do not get our systems right, we will just be running around in circles.
Right, exactly. And that's what we've been doing since the 60s, essentially.
And I'm glad that you've really brought up the issue of systems, because now we have the EACC, which is fully constituted. But could we do more to strengthen our independent bodies, Paul?
Yeah, I think a lot needs to be done. And just to pick up from where Patrick left, I think this country, when we come to talk about, for example, the mechanisms of fighting corruption, we have some good laws, we have some good institutions, but they are not implementing these laws, and therefore the institutions become incapacitated to perform their functions. Now, I think this is where the presidency comes in, because the war against corruption cannot be defeated unless there is political interest to fight corruption. And I think that's what's lacking. So what Gadagi is talking about, for example, the conducive environment in which, for example, institutions like the EACC or the police can perform their responsibility to fight corruption, is perhaps what I can call the existence of a deep state in the Kenyan nation. I want to believe that there's a deep state that controls how things are done in this country. And that's why the war on corruption becomes difficult. You remember last year, President Uhuru Kenyatta had a State House summit on corruption. And you remember he came out publicly and said, I can do nothing else to fight corruption.
Yes, yes, yes.
It's like he's incapacitated. It's like he lacks the ability to do anything else to fight corruption.
Yeah.
It's like he's frustrated, he can't fight corruption. So who is this person that can frustrate the president? Not to fight corruption, to show political interest and political will to fight corruption. Are there certain informal networks in the country that controls how things are being done, and the president cannot dismantle them?
But surely if our president himself cannot... he doesn't have the mandate, or should I say he doesn't have what it takes to then fight the corruption. Because like you said, during that address, you could tell he was frustrated.
Yes.
It's something that also went viral online. Mnataka nifanye nini? Yeah, I remember that clearly very well.
Exactly.
If President Uhuru himself cannot do so much with his position to fight corruption, then what more can our independent bodies do? If the man who is guiding this nation is, quote to quote, I don't want to say scared, but he can't do much, what about our bodies?
Yeah. I think that's a very critical question, when the president says that he can do nothing to fight corruption. Yet he's a man who has been elected by people to lead the country. And one of the effective ways to provide leadership is to ensure there is good governance. If he cannot assure the nation that he can do that, then again the question of his presidency comes into play. I mean, if people have bestowed you the responsibility to lead them, and you are telling them, I can't lead you, then why the president?
Patrick?
Because I don't believe that the president cannot fight corruption in this country. What we need is that he needs to show political will and political interest to fight corruption. That statement alone, how I interpret it, is simply telling the nation, I don't have political will to fight corruption.
I think,
Yes.
again, the big problem here is that we are measuring the war against corruption as part of the, what's it called, it's about prosecutions, you know, in the end. That's what we're looking at. That is the measure we have. And the president then gets a backdoor way of escaping, because he'll say, I'm not in charge of prosecutions. I take this, I gave this list to the ODPP, I did this. And that's where it ends. But actually, no, it's about restructuring the state. You know, it's about looking at it. And a little bit of a history lesson. If you think of how the Kenyan state was created, you know, who created it? It wasn't us who created it. It was created by the colonials. And what was its purpose? It was built essentially to allow a few people who were then the white colonials to extract resources from everybody else. And they set up institutions to allow them to do that. So whether it's the police weren't there to protect you and me. They were there to protect the government and the people who ran it from us. Now, we have never fundamentally changed that state. If you read the TJSA report, that was their central insight, is that the colonial state stays. What you call the deep state is actually the structure of our state itself. It is built to incentivize and reward corruption. It runs on corruption. There's a time a few years ago, I went to traffic court. I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere, and I was given a ticket, and I was told, fine, turn up at court. And I get to the court, and the first person I meet is a policeman. And I'm asking him, where is the court? And he says, oh, well, it's here, but what time is your case? It's 9 o'clock. That file doesn't need to get here. You know, I can make a few calls, give me 1,000 shillings. Then you go to the court, you refuse, I'm not going to pay, I'm not corrupt. You go, you sit in the courtroom, you sit for like 6-7 hours, you know, waiting for the judge to turn up. Who turns up, does a 2-second thing, are you guilty, not guilty, you know, gives you a fine of 25,000 bob. And you go, what behavior do you think that system will incentivize?
So our systems encourage...
They encourage, they are built on it. And the thing to recognize is they are deliberately so. The reason policemen are paid poorly is so that they can participate in corruption, and by doing that, they become enmeshed in it and they have an interest in protecting it. So they don't go prosecuting the bigger guys who do it. It is their reward for maintaining the system. That's why I remember during the vetting of traffic policemen, and we had all this talk of M-Pesa transactions, what they were saying were Chama contributions, you know, by these guys running into millions. You know, where was this money going? Nobody asked that. We just had their transacting. Who do you think they were sending this money to? When you hear traffic policemen pay their seniors to be posted on the road, what do you think they're doing? Why do they want to be on the road? The whole system is created and runs on corruption. You know? And until we actually start a discussion about how we reform that system, how we reform the state, how we reform the purpose for which we have a government, then all the talk we have here is just sort of window dressing. You know? It's not going to change anything.
Samantha, your thoughts?
No, I agree that the system is rotten, right? But then my mind goes to, so then now what do we do, right? We've identified that it's a system that's rotten and it's set up so that corruption can thrive. So I'd be interested to hear what it is that can be done. Is it then we have to socialize ourselves differently in terms, and then also on an individual level, as oneself, right? What are you doing to re-socialize, to reprogram yourself? Right? If the system is like this, what are we doing to socialize ourselves differently so that this is not acceptable? Because we too contribute to it and we need to accept it. We even come to give corruption a fancy name. It's facilitation, it's a contribution, it's a commission. So what are we also doing to change that? As much as we're trying to put the back so much on the government and Uhuru Kenyatta, but you yourself, what are you doing?
And we'll come to talk about what we can do as individuals. Patrick, you had something to say?
Yes, just to address what she said. I think the first thing to recognize, is just what I said, is that the discussion has to be taken to another plane. So it's no longer simply thinking that we only have a few rotten apples in government. The whole system is rotten. So what do we as citizens do to actually fix it? What are the pressure points you can apply to get the necessary reforms so that it changes? How do we make that system accountable to us? There's this idea that corruption is a failure or it's a value issue, that people don't have value. So I really don't buy that. I think that if you look at the East African Bribery Index, it was done in 2014 and another version done again in 2017. And it shows fairly consistent trends. And one of the most important ones is how bribery works. And it says it's only in 25% of cases where bribery is somebody trying to avoid trouble with the authorities. So he's done something wrong and he's bribing a policeman so he's not arrested. That in most cases, bribery is simply extortion by people who wield power, who are in government, who are demanding money to do their jobs. So you want a birth certificate, you go in, you're told, if you don't pay me, you're not going to get it. Or it's going to take 6 months for you to get it. That is what the vast majority of corruption is.
Right.
It's people abusing their power. It is abuse of office. It is extortion. And until we start recognizing that the problem isn't Kenyans. It is a system that is preying on Kenyans. And then start talking about how we fix that system, then unless we do that, I think we'll end up in this sort of circle thing that we're doing.
Right. So Samantha has also brought up a critical aspect of what we as individuals are doing to fight corruption and also the system. So when we come back after this short break, we'll take a look at maybe how we can strengthen our independent bodies such as the ESCC. Would love to hear your thoughts, so stay with us here on Weekend Express.